Hey, good morning. I'm Patricia Murphy. It's Monday. This is Seattle Now. Seattle police will soon have more eyes on the city than ever. The Seattle City Council approved a plan to increase the number of cameras in Seattle's CCTV and real-time crime center network. The move is supposed to help curb crime, but it's also raised concerns about privacy and data security. We'll talk about what the expansion means for public safety and privacy in a minute. But first, let's get you caught up. Washington State Supreme Court Justice Mary Yu has announced she's going to retire at the end of the year. In 2014, Yu became the first Asian, first Latina, and first LGBTQ justice to serve on the state's highest court. Governor Bob Ferguson will appoint a new justice to fill her spot until the 2026 general election. Students at several Seattle high schools are planning a walkout at 11 this morning over new school lunch schedules. Seattle Public Schools has announced that beginning today, campuses will have 2 lunch times instead of 1 to lessen crowds and lunch lines. Students have raised concerns that they won't be able to attend clubs that meet during lunch or socialize with friends. The changes are planned for Ballard, Garfield, Ingram, Lincoln, Nathan Hale, Roosevelt, and West Seattle high schools. After walking out this morning, students are planning to meet at the SPS district offices in Soto. And pickleballers, listen up. Beginning today, new operating hours are in effect for some pickleball courts in Seattle. Courts at Gilman Playground, Laurelhurst Playfield, and Mount Baker will be open from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. on weekends. Weekday mornings get a later start, beginning at 9. City officials say the new hours put the courts in compliance with Seattle's noise ordinance. Previous studies found the courts were producing noise that exceeded legal limits. We'll have more headlines on tonight's episode of Seattle Now. Seattle is expanding its police surveillance network. Last week, the city council voted to expand its closed-circuit television network to 3 new neighborhoods: Capitol Hill, the Stadium District, and the Garfield High School area.
I think that this limited use and deployment of technology in Seattle is important. And I commit to ensuring that this technology is used by our police department properly and is not a coercive tool of weaponization by actors in the other Washington.
That's Seattle City Council member Rob Saka, who voted in favor of the expansion. The council also voted to expand our real-time crime center to 24 hours. This came after multiple hours of public comment, mostly against the expansion. Commenters brought up privacy concerns, federal use of camera data.
These vendors regularly share data with ICE and other law enforcement entities beyond our state's jurisdiction.
Este programa amenaza con causar daños irreparables mediante la discriminación racial.
This program threatens irreparable harm through racial profiling.
Seattle's already on the watch list for the federal government. Again, why are we making it easier?
And some noted the lack of data about how well the cameras we have already work. Dr. Daniel Lawrence understands this skepticism. He's a senior research scientist studying police technology at a nonprofit research org called CNA.
These are all fairly new technologies. A lot of these technologies have come about in the past decade or so. So there has not been tons and tons of research on this. Some of the larger scale, systematic evaluations of CCTV have commonly found that it's there's relatively no impact on these types of technologies in the case of crime levels and slight impact on the case of clearances and making arrests.
He's not sure about whether these technologies are effective, but he thinks they have potential.
What there is support for is using these technologies in a more effective and efficient way.
Beryl Lipton is here now to talk more about privacy concerns and CCTV. She's a senior investigative researcher at Electronic Frontier Foundation. That's a nonprofit defending free speech and privacy in the internet age. Beryl, appreciate you being here. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks so much for inviting me to talk on this.
So Seattle just voted to expand both their CCTV program and their real-time crime center. What do those technologies mean to police and the people who live around them?
Well, in the modern age, the CCTV network is expanding to really include access to live video footage. And so in the modern age, what we're seeing is that a CCTV network is no longer an array of cameras that the government is installing and that they'll check later on. It's actually directly connected to law enforcement and often is available for them to access in real time. And this is part of the Real-Time Crime Center platform, where in general, they manage all of these incoming feeds from the CCTV network and are able to hop between streams in different parts of the city.
I would imagine that people who live in these neighborhoods live alongside this technology with a certain amount of understanding. What have you heard? What do we know about what it's like to live in this kind of environment?
I'm not convinced that individuals truly understand the extent to which law enforcement is able to access in real time some of these cameras, in part because there isn't always a lot of strong transparency around when and how and for what reasons law enforcement is accessing these cameras. So I think if somebody is living in this environment, they might assume either that law enforcement could at any time be watching them, which has a great chilling effect on what they might be doing in public, even if it's not illegal or inappropriate behavior. Or people don't realize that this is a capability that law enforcement has, and they are behaving, again, usually totally legally, totally appropriately for the average individual, but they are subject to the potential of additional law enforcement eyes. I think also something that is relevant that people aren't aware of is the fact that even if law enforcement is accessing these cameras in real time, they can also access these cameras very easily retroactively. And within the Real-Time Crime Center platform, there are multiple capabilities to search past footage and past audio for things that were said, people that were there, vehicles that went by. And we're really expanding the amount of time that a particular instant that happens in public can be dredged up again and used for sometimes law enforcement purposes, but sometimes not.
According to the city of Seattle, CCTV video can be retained for up to 30 days and even longer if it shows criminal activity. The Seattle Police Department has been making a lot of press releases recently about the effectiveness of the Real-Time Crime Center, and even nationally playing out right now. We watched an assassination take place, and within 24 hours, we saw a video of someone running across the top of a building. This is very important for police, but it's also very important for public relations for this kind of technology.
A lot of this is absolutely intentional. I have been to law enforcement conferences where members of the law enforcement community and representatives from the companies that provide this surveillance technology are actively talking and planning about how they are going to engage the media and get out ahead of the narrative that this surveillance technology is a threat to civil liberties and a threat to privacy and security, because that is a reasonable concern for the public to have, and law enforcement is very eager to expand their surveillance toolkit, and they are eager to avoid too many complications from the public about whether or not and how often they can use these kinds of technologies. So I think you're absolutely right to point out that the press releases are part of a press strategy to try to build a counter narrative to these concerns and to try to underline that this is not totally useless. In fact, sometimes they do use this technology in the course of solving a crime.
And let's be honest, we are on video as citizens in this country in more places than we probably realize every day. And I think the question here is that a big deal? And how should we think about that?
I think it's absolutely a big deal. I think that increasingly technology has outstripped our ability to regulate it and our ability to have conversations about whether or not we want those technologies to be collecting information about us, whether that is our mobile location data, our behavior online, or our presence in particular parts of the public. There has to be an updated conversation about what it means to be in public and what rights to privacy we have when we're in those spaces. And I think that it behooves the government locally, at the state level, federally, to really be engaging with some of the security and privacy concerns that the public are raising, even in places that we think we might not have that much privacy, for example, on the sidewalk. We do have an expectation that our presence in some places, the words that we say, are ephemeral and won't ultimately be able to come back and be used against us again when those behaviors are totally legal and are not really subject to scrutiny or shouldn't be subject to scrutiny by law enforcement. There are plenty of reasons why the average individual who is law-abiding might be in public and might not want a collection of data on when they are in certain locations to be available to anyone, because that is highly sensitive information that can absolutely be used by bad actors against an individual.
You know, at the heart of this, Beryl, is trust. And this is a difficult environment politically to have trust right now. What needs to happen for this technology to strike a balance between surveillance that's helpful and surveillance that's damaging and harmful and potentially used against citizens?
A lot of these technologies are being adopted at a pace that feels intentionally designed to undermine the public's ability, city council's ability to put useful guidelines around usage. And I think that's very dangerous. If this technology is as effective as we are being told, then it shouldn't be too difficult to set up replicable, reasonable structures that help us to measure that effectiveness in a way that can be communicated to the public. And I think that transparency around what is being used, how it's being used, and how the government, law enforcement agencies, city councils are able to hold bad actors and abuse accountable, that's absolutely necessary to ensuring that there's trust around the adoption and utilization of these technologies.
It's interesting that you bring up the pace of the expansion of this kind of technology, because the Seattle City Council voted to expand it before the pilot program was even up. And I know that was a significant concern for the people who were watching. But on the other side of that, of course, is people who live in the city who say crime is out of control. We need to be able to see these things. We need to get more eyes on what's happening because our police can't respond fast enough. This solves a problem, at least in the minds, if not bearing out in the data.
I respect the people who are subject to criminal activity in their neighborhoods who have concerns about the quality of public safety in our communities. However, it's very dangerous to not take the time to put into place safeguards on technologies that really could cause far more problems than we're currently facing, simply because people are being driven into urgency by fear that in a lot of cases can be reasonable fear, but does not take into account the other extreme dangers and risks that could result if implementation is not done reasonably and responsibly.
People feel vulnerable here, right? People who are victims of crimes or see crime or live in fear feel vulnerable, and people who are displaced and vulnerable feel vulnerable at the same time. It's a very tricky situation.
It is. The law enforcement community and the government should really take much more seriously the important balance that they need to make when it comes to public safety and public trust versus the relationships and the marketing lines that they have with the private companies who are driven to convince their law enforcement customers to adopt and expand their use of the technologies that they're selling.
It's a slippery slope, it sounds like, Beryl. And even beyond that, even good intent may not play out in the way it's intended. So before I let you go, what should people do? What should people understand in their communities about this kind of technology, for better or for worse?
I think they should understand that they're absolutely empowered to be asking their public officials very difficult questions about how it is being adopted, and to use that ability to talk to public officials as much as they want in order to get a clearer understanding of how these tools are being adopted. I think they also should be pushing for clear accountability mechanisms. We need audits. We need policies around how they can be used, and we need consequences for when they are misused. So I think the public has a really important role to play because this is our lives.
The truth is, the stakes are pretty high, Beryl Lipton. The stakes are pretty high. So thanks so much for taking the time. Beryl Lipton is a senior investigative researcher for the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Really appreciate it.
Glad to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Seattle Now, and hello to our newest Seattle Now donors. You make this show go. If you haven't given, go to KUOW.org and donate today. Today's episode was produced by Brooklyn Jamerson Flowers. It was edited by Caroline Chamberlain Gomez. Our production team also includes Andy Hurst, Vaughn Jones, and Paige Browning. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW Public Radio are members of the NPR network. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you soon.